"Mom, you're too expensive to maintain. You need to find somewhere else to live." Those words shattered my world as I stood on the front porch of the home I'd lived in for 43 years, holding nothing but a battered suitcase and watching my own son change the locks on the door behind me. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst as I looked at the house where I'd raised Robert, where I'd nursed my husband Harold through his final illness, where I'd thought I'd spend my remaining years surrounded by family love. Instead, 3 weeks after Harold's funeral, I was being thrown out like yesterday's garbage by the child I'd sacrificed everything for. I'm Eleanor May Hartwell, and I'm 66 years old. I'm here in my sunroom in my beautiful new home in Mountain Brook, Alabama. Yes, you heard that right, Mountain Brook, one of the wealthiest communities in the South. But 4 years ago, I was standing on a porch with $347 in my purse and nowhere to go, learning the hardest lesson of my life about family, betrayal, and what happens when you lose everything. Tell me in the comments what you're doing right now while you listen to my story. Are you having your morning coffee, maybe working around your house, or just taking a quiet moment for yourself? Hit that like button, because each like is so important to help my voice reach other grandmothers who might be facing their own family betrayals. And subscribe to Grandma's Legacy, because no woman should ever have to face homelessness and abandonment from her own children alone. You see, I'm sitting here now surrounded by the life I built from absolutely nothing, a life that's more successful and fulfilling than anything I ever imagined possible. But back then, standing on that porch, I thought my life was over. I had no idea that my son's cruelest betrayal would become the catalyst for the most extraordinary transformation of my life. What Robert didn't know when he threw me out was that he wasn't just abandoning his mother. He was unleashing a force he never saw coming. I grew up during the Great Depression in rural Alabama, where my mama taught me that family was everything and that a woman's worth was measured by how well she took care of her people. I met Harold Hartwell at a church social in 1971, and we married 6 months later in a simple ceremony at Mount Olive Baptist Church. Harold was a good man who worked at the paper mill in Tuscaloosa for 37 years. We bought our little house on Magnolia Street in 1975, a modest 3-bedroom ranch with a front porch and a backyard big enough for a vegetable garden. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours, and I made it a home filled with love, laughter, and the smell of cornbread baking in the oven every Sunday. Robert was born in 1976, our miracle baby after years of trying and 3 heartbreaking miscarriages. I poured everything into that child, every dream, every hope, every ounce of maternal love I possessed. I volunteered at his school, coached his Little League team, and worked part-time at the local dime store to pay for his college education at the University of Alabama. When Robert graduated with a business degree in 1998, Harold and I were so proud we could have burst. He moved to Birmingham, got a job with a small investment firm, and married Jennifer, a pretty girl from a well-to-do Montgomery family. We thought our boy had made it, that all our sacrifices had paid off with his success and happiness. But success changed Robert in ways we didn't expect. He became critical of our simple lifestyle, embarrassed by our modest home, and increasingly distant from the values Harold and I had tried to instill in him. Jennifer reinforced these attitudes, making subtle comments about small-town thinking and limited perspectives. Still, I kept loving him unconditionally. When Harold started showing signs of dementia in 2015, I became his full-time caregiver. For 3 years, I bathed him, fed him, managed his medications, and held his hand through the long, frightening nights when he didn't recognize me. Robert visited occasionally, usually to suggest that Harold needed professional care that I couldn't afford. I refused to put Harold in a facility. We'd been married for 46 years, and I wasn't going to abandon him when he needed me most. I cashed in my small retirement account to pay for his medications and home health aid visits. I sold my mother's jewelry to cover doctor bills. I took on extra hours at the dime store to make ends meet. When Harold died in March 2018, I was emotionally shattered and financially depleted. The funeral costs took what little savings I had left, But I still had our house, our memories, and what I thought was the love and support of my only child. Robert arrived for the funeral with an attitude that should have warned me. He walked through our house like he was appraising property, commenting on needed repairs and outdated features. He criticized the funeral arrangements I'd made, saying they weren't appropriate for someone of Harold's standing in the community. "Mom, this house is falling apart," he said the day after the funeral. "The roof leaks, the plumbing is old, and you can't maintain a place this size on your income." "I've been maintaining it just fine for 43 years, I replied. "That was when Dad was helping. You need to think realistically about your future." What I didn't realize was that Robert wasn't suggesting I downsize. He was planning to take over completely, but I wouldn't understand the full scope of his betrayal until it was too late to stop it. 2 weeks after Harold's funeral, Robert showed up at my house with a moving truck and Jennifer. I thought they were bringing me comfort items or helping with Harold's belongings. Instead, Robert walked into my kitchen with a folder full of legal documents and the coldest expression I'd ever seen on his face. "Mom, we need to talk about your living situation," he said, spreading papers across the kitchen table. "This arrangement isn't working anymore." "What arrangement? This is my home, Robert." "Actually, that's not entirely accurate." He pulled out a document that made my blood run cold. Dad signed a power of attorney giving me legal authority over his affairs when his dementia got worse. That includes this house. I stared at the papers in disbelief. Harold would never have done that without telling me. He was confused, Mom. You know how bad his condition was getting. I was trying to protect both of you by making sure his assets were properly managed. The room started spinning as I realized what Robert had done. While I was caring for Harold day and night, while I was sacrificing everything to keep him comfortable at home, my son had been manipulating a confused, frightened old man into signing away his wife's security. "Robert, this house is half mine. We bought it together." "Actually, Mom, Alabama law is complicated when it comes to property rights. And honestly, maintaining this place is beyond your means now. The property taxes alone are more than you make at the dime store." Jennifer spoke for the first time, her voice sweet as poison. "Eleanor, we're not trying to hurt you. We're trying to help you transition to a more appropriate living situation for someone your age." "Appropriate? This is my home. I raised my child here. I nursed my husband here." "And now it's time to move on," Robert said firmly. "I've found you a nice little place that's more suitable for your income level." He showed me pictures of a tiny trailer in a rundown mobile home park on the outskirts of town. The trailer looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s, sitting in a lot barely big enough for a car. "I'm not moving to that," I said, my voice shaking with rage and disbelief. "Mom, you don't have a choice. The house needs significant repairs that you can't afford. The smart thing is to sell it now while the market is decent and use the money to secure your future." "And what happens to the money from my house?" Robert and Jennifer exchanged a look that told me everything I needed to know. "Well, there will be expenses, legal fees, real estate commissions, tax implications. After everything is settled, there should be enough left to cover your rent at the new place for a few years." I realized with horrifying clarity that my son was stealing my home and my security, and there wasn't anything I could do to stop him. The power of attorney gave him legal control, and my name wasn't on the deed because of how property laws worked when Harold and I bought the house in 1975. "Robert, please, this house is all I have left of your father. It's my whole life." "Mom, you're being dramatic. You'll adjust to the new place. It'll be easier to maintain, and you won't have to worry about all these repairs." Over the next week, Robert moved quickly and ruthlessly. He hired a real estate agent, scheduled movers to pack up his father's belongings, and told me I had until the end of the month to be out. When I protested or cried, he accused me of being unreasonable and making this harder than it needs to be. The worst part was watching my neighbors and friends witness my humiliation. People I'd known for decades saw strangers loading my furniture into trucks while I stood helplessly on the sidewalk. Some tried to intervene, but Robert had legal documents that gave him authority over everything. "Eleanor, honey, is there anything we can do?" asked Betty Sue Morrison from next door. No, ma'am, I replied, trying to maintain my dignity. My son says this is what's best. But I could see in Betty Sue's eyes that she knew exactly what was happening, and it wasn't what was best for me. The entire neighborhood was witnessing a son abandoning his mother, and there wasn't a thing anyone could do about it. On the last day, as I stood on the porch with my single suitcase, Robert handed me an envelope with $347, what he claimed was left over after all the expenses of selling the house and moving me. This should help you get settled, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. Robert, how can you do this to me? I'm your mother. I gave you everything. Mom, you're being melodramatic. You have a place to live and you'll be fine. You just need to adjust your expectations to match your reality. That's when I knew with absolute certainty that the son I'd raised and loved was gone, replaced by a stranger who saw his own mother as nothing more than an expensive inconvenience. But what Robert didn't know was that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. The trailer Robert had found for me was even worse in person than it had been in the pictures. The door barely closed properly, the tiny windows were cracked, and the carpet smelled like it hadn't been cleaned in decades. The kitchen was smaller than most people's closets, with appliances that looked like they belonged in a museum. I sat on the sagging couch that first night, surrounded by the few personal belongings I'd been allowed to keep, and cried until I had no tears left. At 66 years old, I was starting over with nothing but the clothes in my suitcase and $347 to my name. But as I sat there in that awful little trailer, something shifted inside me. The grief and shock began to transform into something else. A cold, burning anger that was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. My son had betrayed me, stolen from me, and abandoned me. But he hadn't destroyed me. Not yet. If you're feeling this rage and determination with me right now, show your support. Hit that like button, comment if you've ever been underestimated by your own family, and subscribe because we grandmothers need to stick together when life tries to throw us away like garbage. The next morning, I walked to the Goodwill store and bought myself a decent dress for $5. Then, I walked to the library and spent 6 hours learning everything I could about Alabama property law, elder abuse, and small business licensing. What I discovered made my blood boil even hotter. Robert had indeed manipulated Harold into signing that power of attorney, but there were legal remedies available if I could prove coercion or undue influence. The problem was that lawyers cost money I didn't have, and Robert had made sure I was left with almost nothing to fight back with. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. If Robert thought he'd left me powerless, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. I started walking through the wealthy neighborhoods of Mountain Brook and Vestavia Hills, looking for something most people never even notice, the things rich people throw away. What I found amazed me. Beautiful furniture sitting by the curb because it had a small scratch. Designer clothes donated to charity because they were last season. Antiques discarded because they didn't match someone's new decorating scheme. I began collecting these items, cleaning them up in my tiny trailer and researching their value online. That $5 dress I'd bought became my work uniform as I transformed from a discarded mother into an entrepreneur with nothing to lose and everything to prove. My first sale was a solid oak dining table I found in a Vestavia Hills driveway. Someone had put it out for trash pickup because one leg was slightly wobbly. I spent 2 hours with wood glue and sandpaper, then sold it on Facebook Marketplace for $250 to a young couple who couldn't believe their luck at finding such a beautiful piece. That sale taught me 3 crucial lessons. Rich people discard valuable things. There's always someone willing to pay for quality items at reasonable prices, and I had a gift for seeing potential where others saw only problems. Within a month, I was making more money from my trash-picking business than I'd ever made at the dime store. Within 3 months, I had enough saved to rent a small storage unit for inventory. Within 6 months, I'd moved to a better trailer and was running a legitimate resale business with an LLC and everything. But this was just the beginning. What I discovered next would turn my small operation into something Robert never could have imagined. By the end of my first year in that trailer, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving in ways that surprised everyone, including myself. My little resale business had grown into a serious operation with regular customers and a reputation for finding exceptional pieces at incredible prices. I'd learned to spot valuable items from 50 yards away. Depression glass, mid-century modern furniture, vintage jewelry, antique tools. I could identify treasures that other people walked right past. My tiny trailer became a workshop where I restored, repaired, and refinished items that most people would have considered worthless. But the real transformation happened when I met Dolores Washington, an interior designer from Birmingham who became one of my regular customers. Dolores saw something in me that even I didn't recognize at the time. "Eleanor, you have an incredible eye for quality and style," she told me one day as I delivered a restored Victorian settee to her showroom. "Have you ever considered expanding beyond individual pieces?" "What do you mean?" "I mean staging entire rooms, creating complete looks for clients who want vintage charm with modern functionality. You could be sourcing and curating collections instead of just selling individual items." That conversation planted a seed that grew into something extraordinary. I started studying interior design magazines, watching home improvement shows, and teaching myself about decorating trends and color theory. I began buying items not just based on their individual value, but on how they could work together to create beautiful spaces. My business evolved from Eleanor's resale to Eleanor's vintage collections. Instead of selling a table here and a lamp there, I was creating complete room designs using carefully curated pieces that told stories and reflected the personalities of my clients. The word spread quickly through Birmingham's design community. Eleanor Hartwell could furnish your entire home with authentic vintage pieces for a fraction of what you'd pay for new furniture, and the result would be more beautiful and unique than anything you could buy in a showroom. By my second year, I had clients from all over Alabama and parts of Georgia. I rented a warehouse space, hired 2 assistants, and started attending estate sales and auctions as a serious buyer rather than just someone looking through trash. My third year brought the breakthrough that changed everything. I was featured in Alabama Living magazine as one of the state's most successful small business owners. The article, titled "From Cast-Off to Cash Cow: How One Woman Built an Empire from Estate Sale Finds," brought me national attention. That's when I caught the eye of Southern Living magazine. They wanted to do a feature story on my transformation from abandoned mother to successful entrepreneur. They photographed me in my beautiful new showroom, surrounded by gorgeous vintage pieces that I'd rescued and restored. But the real vindication came when they asked me to design a room for their annual idea house. Me, the woman who'd been thrown out with a suitcase, was being asked to contribute to one of the most prestigious home design showcases in the South. The exposure from Southern Living transformed my business into something I'd never dreamed possible. Suddenly, I had clients from all over the country wanting Eleanor Hartwell pieces. Interior designers were seeking me out. Home and Garden Television wanted to feature my story. By year 4, Eleanor's vintage collections had become a $1 million business. I owned the warehouse, employed 8 people, and had a waiting list of clients who wanted my services. I'd bought a beautiful home in Mountain Brook, ironically, just a few miles from where I'd started picking through rich people's trash. That's when Robert decided he needed to reconnect with his dear old mother. But the woman he was about to encounter was nothing like the broken, helpless victim he'd abandoned 4 years earlier. The first sign that Robert was paying attention to my success came through my cousin Marie, who still lived in our old neighborhood. She called me one evening with news that made me smile grimly. "Eleanor, honey, you'll never guess who's been asking questions about you. Robert drove by your old house yesterday and stopped to talk to Betty Sue Morrison. He wanted to know how to get in touch with you." "Did Betty Sue tell him?" "Honey, Betty Sue told him exactly what she thought of him throwing his mama out like garbage. Then she told him if he wanted to find you, he could look in Southern Living magazine like everybody else." I'd been expecting this call for months. My success hadn't happened in a vacuum. I was featured in magazines, interviewed on local television, and had been written up in the Birmingham News business section. It was impossible for Robert to remain ignorant of what his expensive-to-maintain mother had accomplished. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in November 2022. I was in my showroom arranging a display of restored mid-century modern pieces when my phone rang. "Mom, it's Robert." I let the silence stretch for a long moment before responding. "Hello, Robert." "Mom, I've been seeing your name in magazines and newspapers. Congratulations on your success." "Thank you." Another pause. "I was hoping we could get together and talk. Maybe I could take you to lunch?" "I'm quite busy these days, Robert. My calendar is booked through the holidays." "Mom, please. I know things ended badly between us, but you're still my mother. I'd like to make things right." The conversation that followed was a masterpiece of careful choreography on my part. I agreed to meet him for coffee, at a public place, during business hours, with a firm end time. I wasn't about to give him any advantage or opportunity to manipulate me again. When Robert walked into the upscale coffee shop in Mountain Brook, I almost didn't recognize him. He looked older, stressed, and significantly less prosperous than the confident businessman who had thrown me out 4 years earlier. His suit was nice but not expensive. His car in the parking lot was several years old, and he had the desperate look of someone who needed something badly. "Mom, you look amazing," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "I can't believe how successful you've become." "Thank you. It's been an interesting journey." "Listen, I want to apologize for how things went after Dad died. I was grieving and not thinking clearly. I made some decisions that I regret." I sipped my coffee and waited for him to continue. "I should have handled the house situation differently. I should have included you in the decisions instead of just doing what I thought was best. What you thought was best was stealing my home and abandoning me with $300 in a suitcase." Robert flinched. "It wasn't supposed to be like that. I was trying to protect your interests, but I can see now that I handled it all wrong." "What do you want, Robert?" The mask slipped, and I saw the desperation underneath. "Mom, I need help. My business is failing, Jennifer left me, and I'm about to lose everything. I've made terrible mistakes, and I don't know where else to turn." There it was. Not an apology, not genuine remorse, but another request for money. My son had tracked down his abandoned mother because he needed financial rescue. "I see. And you thought I might be willing to help you after you threw me away like garbage? Mom, please. I know I hurt you, but you're the only family I have left. I'm desperate." I looked at this man, my son, the child I'd loved unconditionally, the adult who had betrayed me so cruelly, and felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not hatred, but a kind of sad pity for someone who had never learned the difference between love and convenience. "Robert, I want you to understand something very clearly. When you abandoned me, you didn't just take my house. You showed me exactly who you really are. You're someone who sees people as either useful or expensive, and when I stopped being useful, you discarded me." "But Mom, I'm trying to make amends now." "No, you're not. You're trying to make a withdrawal, just like you did 4 years ago." What I said next would define our relationship forever, and establish boundaries that no amount of desperation could cross. "Robert," I said, setting down my coffee cup with deliberate calm, "I'm going to give you something much more valuable than money. I'm going to give you the truth." He leaned forward eagerly, probably expecting me to soften and offer financial help despite my harsh words. "The truth is that you taught me the most important lesson of my life. You showed me that I am much stronger, more capable, and more valuable than I ever imagined. When you threw me away, you forced me to discover who Eleanor Hartwell really is underneath all those years of being someone's wife and someone's mother. Mom, I'm not finished. You also taught me that love without respect is meaningless, and that family relationships based on obligation and guilt are toxic. When you abandoned me, you freed me to build relationships based on mutual respect and genuine affection." I pulled out my phone and showed him pictures from my recent 70th birthday party, a celebration attended by my employees, my clients, my neighbors, and friends I'd made through my business. The room was full of people who valued Eleanor the entrepreneur, Eleanor the friend, Eleanor the woman who had built something beautiful from nothing. These people love me for who I am, not what I can provide them. They celebrate my successes instead of being embarrassed by my limitations. They would never dream of throwing me away when I become inconvenient. Robert's face was pale. "Mom, please. I know I made mistakes, but I'm trying to fix them now." "You're not trying to fix anything, Robert. You're trying to get something, just like you did when you manipulated your confused father into signing over his house, just like you did when you stole my security and left me homeless. You only contact family when you need something." I stood up to leave, but I had one more thing to say. "I forgive you, Robert, not because you deserve it, but because holding on to anger would poison the beautiful life I've built. But forgiveness doesn't mean I'm going to enable your irresponsibility or allow you to hurt me again. What am I supposed to do? I'm going to lose everything. You're going to do what I did when you left me with nothing. You're going to figure it out, work hard, make better choices, and build something from whatever you have left. And maybe, if you do that with integrity and humility, you'll discover who you really are underneath all that entitlement and selfishness." I left him sitting in that coffee shop, and I felt lighter than I had in years. I'd faced my betrayer, spoken my truth, and walked away with my dignity intact. The months that followed brought news through the family grapevine about Robert's continued struggles. His business failed, he filed for bankruptcy, and he had to move back to Alabama from Birmingham. But I also heard that he'd found work as a sales associate at a furniture store, that he was living within his means for the first time in years, and that he seemed to be learning humility through hardship. Meanwhile, my business continued to flourish. I opened a second location, published a book about finding treasure in discarded items, and started teaching workshops for other women who wanted to turn their eye for value into profitable businesses. My 71st birthday party was featured in Southern Living as an example of gracious entertaining with vintage style. The party was held in my beautiful home, surrounded by pieces I'd rescued and restored, attended by people who had become family through friendship and respect rather than blood and obligation. I received a card that day from Robert, not asking for anything, not making excuses, just acknowledging my birthday and expressing hope that someday he might earn the right to be part of my life again. I didn't respond to the card, but I didn't throw it away either. Someday, if Robert truly changed, if he learned to offer love instead of just seeking advantage, there might be room for a different kind of relationship between us. But it would be on my terms, built on mutual respect, and it would never again involve me sacrificing my security for his convenience. The woman who had been thrown away with a suitcase had become someone who would never again be discarded, abandoned, or underestimated by anyone. As I sit here in my sunroom, looking out at the garden I've created behind my Mountain Brook home, I'm amazed by the journey that brought me to this moment. 4 years ago, I was a broken, discarded woman with no money, no home, and no hope. Today, I'm a millionaire entrepreneur who built an empire from items other people threw away. The irony isn't lost on me. I was treated like trash and ended up building my fortune from trash. But the real transformation wasn't financial. It was discovering my own worth after a lifetime of measuring myself by how well I served other people's needs. Robert taught me the most painful and valuable lesson of my life, that unconditional love is actually conditional abuse if it means accepting treatment that destroys your dignity. I had confused enabling with caring, sacrifice with love, and submission with virtue. When he abandoned me, I was forced to confront the truth about our relationship. I hadn't been a beloved mother. I'd been a convenient resource. When I stopped being useful and started being expensive, I was discarded without a second thought. But in losing everything I thought mattered, I discovered everything that actually does matter: self-respect, independence, genuine relationships, and the satisfaction of building something beautiful with your own hands and determination. I learned that being thrown away doesn't make you worthless. Sometimes it just means the people who discarded you couldn't recognize your value. My success isn't revenge against Robert. It's proof that his assessment of me was wrong. The hardest lesson was accepting that I had enabled Robert's selfishness for decades by always putting his needs ahead of my own dignity. Every time I swallowed my hurt feelings, every time I opened my wallet to solve his problems, every time I accepted disrespect in the name of keeping peace, I was teaching him that I didn't deserve better treatment. But I also learned that it's never too late to stop accepting what you don't deserve and start demanding what you do deserve. At 66 years old, homeless and heartbroken, I found the strength to rebuild not just my life, but my sense of self-worth. To any grandmother listening who has been made to feel like a burden, who has been told she's too expensive to maintain, who has been discarded by family she sacrificed everything for, you are not worthless. You are not too old to start over. You are not defined by how others treat you. Your value doesn't decrease based on someone's inability to see your worth. Your life doesn't end when ungrateful family members decide you're inconvenient. Your story isn't over until you decide it's over. If this story of transformation and triumph touched your heart, like this video right now, tell me in the comments what you discovered about your own strength when life forced you to start over, and subscribe to Grandma's Legacy, because every woman deserves to know that being discarded can be the beginning of discovering who you really are. I'm sitting here in my beautiful home that I bought with money I earned, surrounded by treasures I rescued and restored, living proof that the best revenge is a life lived with dignity, purpose, and uncompromising self-respect. At 70 years old, I'm not just surviving, I'm thriving in ways I never thought possible. Remember, when someone throws you away, they're not making a statement about your worth. They're revealing their inability to recognize value. The treasure was always there. Sometimes it just takes being discarded to discover how precious you really are.